Hi there. This is Richard Nikoley. Doing another of my things where I hold a discussion, a conversation. I don't really like to call them interviews. I get interesting people, smart, interesting, and we just go at it. And I'm with my friends Andy Curzon coming to you from London, and Noah Revoy coming to you from Portugal near Lisbon, I believe. And I'm here up in the Sierra Nevadas in the eastern part of California, central eastern part of California. And I blog at freetheanimal.com. So I put these videos onto YouTube, and then I write a short post about them. So you can always find them there. Just start scrolling down, and I tag them. Okay, so I've introduced Noah. I've introduced Andy. Noah is a coach. I'm going to give him a second here. Why don't you, Andy, give us just your elevator pitch about what you do, and then Noah, you just follow right after.
At the moment, I'm working on networking people around the world to bring business together. That's the simplest explanation. I did a bit last interview on the details of that, so there you go now. What about you?
Yeah, I'm focusing on helping people to come together in romantic relationships. So there's a lot of confusion about that, gender roles, how to attract women. And there's a lot of well-developed pickup artist community. But if you're not looking for a quick roll and you're looking for something long-term, there's not actually a lot of red-pilled information on that. There's lots of blue-pilled, not a lot of red-pilled. And the other thing I'm doing is helping people to develop agency. So that's the ability to control their own lives. And that's really important right now. So many people are out of control, anxious because they don't have any control over their life. And I'm trying to help them. I'm helping them to have that control over their life and that sense of calm.
Andy, you were tasked, I guess. Are you self-tasked to do an outline of of our talk here? So I think you're gonna cover those points. Two or three of them, and then we'll go from there. 1, 2, 3.
Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, I thought we'd start talking about truth and honesty, just the difference and the confusion people have between them, just as a basis, and then we can move on to what I call integrating limitations, which is so looking at yourself and others, but mainly yourself, and saying, what's wrong with me? Where do I lie compared to other people? Where do I sit here? What can I bring? But more importantly, what can't I do? And how's that affecting me and everyone around me? And that's a really good place to start before going on to the main topic today, I think, which is frames of success. And that those frames are not just saying, how smart are you, how hardworking are you? It's saying, given that you have a certain IQ, it's given that you have a certain conscientiousness level, which is sort of, generally pretty stable in your life. And given that you have a certain tendency to neuroticism, which impedes on your ability to achieve. What other strategies can you formulate, whether it be for romantic relationships, which I think Noah can have a lot to say, or whether it can be socially, business, or anything like that? I think that's a good structure for today. So maybe kick us off on your view on truth and honesty, Richard.
Yeah, this has been something, and it's we talked somewhat. You and Moritz and I talked some about proprietarianism in our last discussion last week, and I will call it a quibble. I know that it's possible to. I put it like this: I know it's possible to be honest by being a truth teller, and I believe the proprietarian, formation is you tell the truth. It's a truth telling, but then with a warranty somewhat to back it up. I think that's the general scope of it. Maybe Noah has it more deep than that. But is that the problem is that there's all these dynamics that come into play. Like, are you truly integrating every bit of truth? The so-called the whole truth, right? So contextually, are you integrating everything? Are you just letting yourself kind of forget about this little thing and that little thing and that little thing? or it goes into, you know, the legal system in particular. And I agree with you, Andy, where you said that proprietarianism seems to have some limitations in terms of how of the legal process and law. And of course, ours in America, you know, is rooted in British common law. And so, you know, you see it on these shows on TV all the time where, you know, when someone is testifying on the stand, I mean, some of it's very good in that you don't get to introduce irrelevancies and so on like that, or stuff that's excluded from evidence in pre-trial hearings, for example. But when you do not, but you see very often where people are not allowed to give a full context kind of thing.
Richard, I've got a good point here.
I want this one little fact and this one little fact only, nothing else, no exculpatories, no explanations, no mental processes, nothing like, just the fact, just the fact. And this,
yeah, and they often swear at the beginning of trial in English-speaking countries to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
yes.
Yet it's impossible to tell the whole truth because the amount of information you'd have to convey the whole truth would make it impossible to have a court case. You'd spend 10 years explaining things.
So no, I actually think it's amazing you brought up court cases, because I studied law and I'm very interested in the legal process and the history of law. And something that struck me when seeing court cases is how much the early stages are sort of, especially in criminal cases rather than civil,
Yes.
how much it's a game of playing with the law, statute interpretation and all that. But more than that, it's about getting the defendant on the stand or a witness and trying to show that they can lie. So again, it's not truth, it's honesty. What they're doing, the whole spiel of the defense lawyer to try and get his guy off, or however it works, is to discredit the witness. And what they're really doing here is a very good paradigm. Is they're playing with this truth. They're playing with what they think happened and how they think that should relate to dispensation or payment towards the victim. And then they're playing with, there are these characters in this story who are dealing with honesty. So this is a really good delineation of honesty and truth. And they're you can't really talk about truth without our interpretation of it. And you can't really talk about honesty without relating it to the truth or our best guess of the truth.
Well,
what's interesting too in a court case is that the witnesses, whether they be from the government or not, or whether they be from private witnesses, they have a burden to tell the truth. They have an obligation. The lawyers and the judge have no obligation to tell the truth. And this means that it's not possible to really discover truth in court. We don't discover truth in court. What we do is try to figure out which lie is most believable, and that's the one that we try to convince the jury of. My dad was a paralegal, and he used to say that if the law is on your side, argue the law. If the facts are on your side, argue the facts. If the witnesses are on your side, that's what you work with. If nothing's on your side, argue emotionally to the jury and hope to get your guy off. And that's how they think. The legal system is structured that way. It has no real interest in uncovering truth.
It's very strange because, it's so easy to be critical of the legal system, and I've spent a lot of time doing that. But I think it's almost like English common law backed up by statutes. So you've got statutes which are written laws, and common law which is based on judgments beforehand, which is called a judge will make something called ratio decidendi, which is like a comment pertinent to the case, which has to be followed by lower courts as precedent. And then they have precedent, and then they have a second thing. I won't go too deep, but just simply called obiter dictum. So a judge will say, also to the facts of the case, this happened here. If this were to happen again, I might suggest this. So then a lower case is not bound, but can use this. And the lawyer, let's say 3 years later, can say, in the case of 2016 between Nikoley and Revoy, this happened. And judge Smith said this obiter dictum. Did you see what I mean? And what I'm saying by that is actually, I think the balance between statute, which is sort of objective law as best we can get to it, and common law is actually not the worst meld. Anyway, so moving on from the actual, the legal structure of all this, I think one thing about honesty, which I want to get across in terms of what we're going to talk about later, is that the yardstick of honesty, the yardstick of an opinion is honesty rather than truth. So when we're talking to someone and someone says, I think, and they say a fact that is just plainly wrong, you've got to split that and think, okay, that guy's probably wrong. In my opinion, he's wrong, but by his own opinion, he's telling the truth. And to do that in conversation, I think, is something that most people completely overlook.
Yes. So, I wanted to, especially for the people who are listening out of there, I wanted to do a quick, simple, it's oversimplified juxtaposition, just so you get an idea of what we mean by truth versus honesty. So let's take a fictional guy, John Doe, and fact number one. He premeditated the plan to kill 5 people. Fact number 2, he was able to flank around them. They're pinned down in a ravine. He got it behind them. And fact number 3, he shot all of them dead and killed them, right? So those are 3 facts, right? Now, you could, if in some strange kangaroo court where situations didn't come out, or if you wanted to manipulate, you can use these 3 facts. You're telling the truth. You're telling 3 truths, right? 3 static truths that are truth. They're fact, right? Okay, but then if we do an honest process and integrate, well, John Doe was a soldier in World War II in Germany. His platoon was pinned down, so he got around the Germans and got them from behind, saved the platoon. He's a hero. So there's, the facts versus the whole integrated honesty of the whole thing, the whole situation. So that's what we're kind of talking about, where you can use truths to kind of get to create a narrative, to create a picture that you want for whatever ends that you're trying to achieve, whether it be to uplift yourself or to tear down the other person, rather than being honest. So I call truth telling a static. It's a static process, whereas honesty is dynamic, right? And it's all encompassing. I mean, you're either honest or you're dishonest.
You can look at it like a circle like this. So truth here and honesty here. And if you are honest about the feedback you get, so let's say, you try and go out with a girl and she says no, or whatever it is, and you feed that back in honestly, it allows your understanding of truth, hopefully, to be more sophisticated. And then you get a position where you get feedback and you have to be honest. And then if you're honest, your truth increases. And then you get to do you see what I mean? That's one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
We also have to see too that very often, in order to have a productive conversation, we have to be honest, yet we can't tell the whole truth simply because that will introduce irrelevant facts. An example, if you're an astronaut and you're looking at the Earth from outer space and someone says, what does the Earth look like? You say, it's a blue-green marble, it's beautiful and whatnot. Okay, you're being honest. That's what you can see from your vantage point. But if you're standing in the middle of the Sahara Desert, it's brown. Mm-hmm. If you're standing on one of the beaches in Hawaii where the sand is black, then the Earth looks black. If you're in the Arctic, it looks white. And so when you're in a different perspective, you're going to have to explain things in a different way. Now, I get a lot of flack for saying things like women think this way or men think that way, or this is what works in relationships. And people will say, well, they'll bring up the not all argument. And that's true. There will be exceptions to the rule.
Can you just elucidate the Naxal argument just quickly?
Yeah, the Naxal. I often say not all. I'm surprised how many people don't know the acronym for that. So it's not all X is like that. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that if you preface everything you say with, but not all X is like that,
Right.
you end up losing any kind of poeticism, any kind of fluidity to your conversation, and the point gets lost.
Yes, because you're not trying to. I make this point too. You know, it's true that not all. There's always exceptions, but it's only applicable if someone is proposing that everyone is like that. So you've got nowhere. Everyone. I'm not saying everyone is like that, and your response is, but there's a lot of things. There's a lot of correlations and whatnot. There's a lot of stuff we can learn, and your argument is, not everybody's like that. So we've gone nowhere. Right.
I think a lot of this
that everyone is.
I think a lot of this feeds into people's desire to feel that if they have a strong opinion about something that they are in the conversation. So, you know, whether it's about feminism or you know, self-improvement or left-wing, right-wing, or whatever, if most people feel that if they take a stance, they are they're not sitting on the fence, they're a strong character. And actually, I think it's more sophisticated sometimes to be able to say, okay, well, here's this rule. In general, men behave in this manner more often than in this manner, whereas women behave in this manner more often than this manner. And instead of saying, well, that's true and let's use it and overextend it, use it as the basis of our philosophy or our modus operandi, to basically, I don't know, I think, Richard, when you talk to Noah, and, well, I don't know, Richard, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, I mean, people. It's similar to what I was gonna say in that you know, when someone raises a not all argument like this, they're trying to participate, and they think they're saying something clever and falsifying, right? But really, all they're doing is being opinionated and trying to show up when they're. You see a lot of this online, and so like I can't hardly read comment threads on almost anything for very long. Not so much amongst the people like on Facebook I'm friends with or the blogs I go to, but some of the mainstream outlets or even some of the purported you know, libertarian or conservative one. It's like, oh my gosh, you know, I call them Me Too posts, right? You know, someone says something, me too, me too, me too, me too, me too. It's like you're just wasting space, wasting air. All right, something like that.
Well, yeah, I think Andy, once you commented on one of my posts where I explained that we are all descended from people who generalized.
Yeah.
So there, you know, some of our ancestors had to say, if a lion jumps out of the forest at me, I have two options: run away, because you know, in most history you can't fight a lion, you'll lose. I'm going to run away, or I'm going to see if this lion might be that friendly one that potentially exists. So you have those options, and we're all descended from the one that ran away, because the guy who said maybe this lion is friendly, unlike all the other lions, they got eaten.
Yeah, so the way I look at that, I think my point back was sort of saying that's a circumstance thing. That's what I might call an overextension of the evolutionary argument. It's a strong and correct comment. It's an honest and truthful comment within the bounds. But as our situations and our surroundings change, obviously the simple fact would be, you know, we're not in peril of lions these days very often. The way we respond to threat can be judged by different measures. So, you know, the simple fact is, if I freak out and hit someone who shouts at me on the street now, I'm probably going to be in prison or whatever, whereas hundreds of years ago, I'm probably saving my family. Do you see what I mean? The situations are different. So that was all my thing. I wasn't knack-selting it by any means at all. I was just saying that nowadays, you know, women, for example, might go for men who have a little bit more self-control as a sort of, as a Darwinian process through the next generation. That may be searchable by women more than it was 1,000 years ago.
Well, I agree with the self-control. It's always been important, even when you react. So for example, if you read the stories of some of the early British, I can't remember his name now, British guys who were hunting tigers that were man-eaters in India. It was extremely important that they kept their cool, because occasionally they'd walk around a corner and, 30 feet away from them was a tiger. That tiger could reach them in under a second. If they made any quick movement, it's a cat. Quick movement will stimulate the pounce reflex and they're dead. And they would have to very slowly, while they're looking at the cat, kind of hypnotizing it a bit, get their gun out and get ready to shoot. And that was, they talk about that as being the most nerve-wracking moment of their life. Now, they had to exercise a tremendous amount of control. For men, control, it's connected with agency, has always been a highly sought-after trait. The question is that there are so many decisions to make in life that we have to a certain extent, generalize, but we have to constantly upgrade what those generalizations are. Yeah. So if you're walking down Paris in the 1950s, down the street in Paris, it's very safe. You see a German fellow approaching you down the street, and you say hello, you walk by, or it's Paris, so probably you just ignore them. But if you're doing the same thing 10 years earlier, 10, 15 years earlier, and you see the German guy coming towards you, you probably want to take another street because he's got a gun and a tank behind him, and he's invading. And so we need to update which generalizations we're operating under. We have to be willing to do that. Yet we still have to generalize, because the number of decisions, small decisions we have to make every day are so enormous that if we don't use some generalizations, we won't be able to function. We'll be burdened under too many decisions.
Yeah, and I think there's a point I'll make later on this in terms of frames for success, on if we narrow our view along one pathway, we block out all the others. So if you're saying, men act in this way, or if you're going off one scale and you know where you fall on that scale, you're not integrating other points there, which I think is not very practical, but we can talk about that later. So I think that brings us nicely onto the concept of limitations. I think if we're talking about how do we succeed in what we want to do, that's sort of life in a way, whether it's, and in some sense we want to, how do we succeed in the long term and for people around us, as well as in the short term and for us. And I think for me, that starts with looking at myself and saying, what can't I do? How can I expand my agency? How do I expand my I call it sort of appropriate behavior in some sense. When you're playing tennis, you want to be able to be skilled at it, to be able to integrate into the behavior. If you're talking about, a certain topic, if you've got an understanding of the topic, you can have a better conversation. And I think looking at my own limitations, one of them I've looked at recently would be, I've only lived in London my whole life. And I think for all of those things, another one oddly is that I don't have children. I'm only 32, but whenever the conversation of children comes up, I sort of pull back and I listen, and I basically feel like a duck out of water. And I'm not saying I should have children. I'm saying that's a part of my life that's untrained. And so, for example, living in London, I think that constraint for me has narrowed so much. A lot of the people I speak to have lived all around the world, and they've got such a more nuanced view of certain areas within life. And I was just wondering if you two had any limitations that would you could have a chat about. No?
No,
yeah, I've been having.
None. I have no limits, no limitations, no.
Not all of us can be perfect, Richard.
Yeah.
No, I'm having problems with my endocrine system, so that means the hormone system. So thyroid, adrenals, testosterone, all that stuff. And what it's causing is it causes me to have less energy than I should, but intermittently. So every once in a while, I will just have a day or two with literally no energy. And it's like someone drugged me, and it's difficult to deal with. And I need to plan around that. I need to have two things. I need to be able to have the fortitude to push through it when there's something I can't avoid, but I have to have the humility to say, maybe this project I wanted to do is going to have to be put off for a couple of days, and not take on things that I can't handle. I have a wife who's pregnant with twins. She's going to give birth in a few months, and I have a 5-year-old. So I need to budget my energy in such a way that I'm giving to them everything that they need. because, you know, in a family, you were mentioning kids. It's very hard for men to think about, I want kids. It's better to think a family. That's a better structure to think in. Women think I want kids or not. Men think I want a family or not, because they want the package. The women just want babies, basically. Like they want kids under the age of 7. And that's what their fancy is. And the man, they want the whole package and the legacy that comes with it. So I have to focus my attention to make sure that I'm budgeting my time so as to make sure that my children and my wife are getting what they need, as well as helping all my clients and doing my own work and doing things for myself as well. So it does require me to work within those limitations.
Yeah, and also not using them as excuses, as we were talking about earlier, and just saying, you know, you could easily say on a day, you know, as an example, on a day where your thyroid's playing up or you're feeling shattered, you could just say, okay, instead of I'll take an hour's nap, you could say I'll take the day off, and then you get up in the evening, and you think, I feel better. Yeah, I'll take tomorrow. You know, you milk it, and I think in some sense we've been talking about the truth and honesty loop. So, you know, let's say honesty here and truth here. What you're doing is you're being exposed to feedback in the evening saying, no, you actually feel better now. And you're going, no, I don't feel better. You're lying to yourself. So you're taking the next day off. And I think that that's something that the devil's us all, except Richard, of course, who has no.
Okay. So, but it's interesting. So, you know, you mentioning at the beginning about, you know, always living in London. You know, I grew up in Reno, Nevada. And then, you know, I went away to college. But I never even considered living abroad. And then in my formation to be a Navy officer, I ended up spending a month in Korea and Japan. And I'm like, wow. And then, you know, within a year, once I got done with the schooling, and a year and a half or so, then, you know, I'm in Japan. I have a flat on the beach across the peninsula from the Navy base, and was essentially there for 5 years. And in that time, traveled all over, you know, basically all the Asian countries that you can, and some many times, and a lot of times. So I spent a lot of time, you know. You know, I look back in retrospect, and some of the places I found myself like late at night, I was like, I'm amazed I'm alive. You know, just me and enough money. You know,
Richard, can I make a comment on that? Which is, do you remember the last conversation with Moritz? I said, what are you doing tropiclastically to change your life in behavior terms? And you said you're selling your place, and you elucidated all of the ideas you had to put in place, and you're going to move. Well, an example of the limits of living in London is if you said to me, you know, if I come across an experience that leads me to want to change my life like you have, I haven't got the experience to know what it's like living in Korea or this or that. I've got nothing to draw on. So I can go, I might move to Australia or this or that, but I'm working off such a small frame of reference. And I think that's what I meant by limitations. Sorry.
But anyway, I think age is it, you know, it's kind of like I was like, you know, early 20s at the time. And it's kind of like, what could go wrong? You know, you just kind of do it. Yeah, that's kind of what young men do. And hopefully you survive. And then you learn from your mistakes. And those who don't survive don't pass on the gene, you know, same old long story. So I survived. And it was like, of course, it's easy. It's no problem, right? There's so any limitations you have or like I could never live anywhere but America, right? They're just those kind of limitations removed. And then you know, I worked in France for the French Navy, so I had to learn French. And so all of these things, like how could I ever be a navigator on 2 French warships? Well, you know, you break it down, you remove these false limitations, you go learn French, you go to the country, you get yourself established, and you put on your uniform and go to work, you know. And it was tough the first 6 months because I'm not fully fluent by that point. But you just struggle through it and build your relationships with the guys that you can communicate better with and get things done. So that's just a thing of limitations. But one thing I wanted to mention about that, where the whole age thing pops in, because this was 30 years ago, right? I came back, and so I've been in America, and I did a business, and well, two failed, and then the third one was the charm, typical story. But then, so I'm doing this gig in Poland, Warsaw, Poland, a speaking gig, and then I'm going to southern Spain to trek around for a week. And I'm amazed that I have like these tinges of anxiety about all this stuff that I've got to, I've got the passport, I've got the airline tickets, all the itinerary and everything, but I still have to go there and get there and do it. And even like, was it about almost 15 years ago, I did a auto trek, 6,000 kilometers through France and Spain and Italy, and then up through Switzerland, Germany, all that stuff. Drove, and it was not much of a problem. But I find it's weird to feel these limitations. I guess you would say, they're light limitations. It's not that I know I can't do it. It's just that it amazes me. It's like, I don't know whether it's caution, excessive caution, excessive worry, or so as you get older that you are like, well, I got to be more careful and blah, 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 blah. Does that, and I don't know, you guys are a lot younger. You may not have begun to experience these things yet as limitations, limitations that really aren't there. But what I'm saying is I looked back before, and it was like, no big deal. And now I'm more serious. So I take these things and I'm like, da, 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 da. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a healthy level of anxiety, though. A lot of people, they want to eliminate anxiety completely from their life, and that's suicidal. I have really, if you take one of the big 5 personality tests, I have really, really low neuroticism. The problem with that is that I will occasionally get myself into situations which, if I had a little more neuroticism, I would have kept myself out of. And, when I was younger, that meant getting into a lot of fights with people twice my size, or 2 or 3 of them at once, and then getting the crap kicked out of me because I didn't have enough neuroticism to go, yeah, I probably can't win this. I should somehow figure a way to get out of it. And a little neuroticism is good, keeps you alive,
I agree, Noah, because, and I think here in terms of like going back to college and partying and going out, being in foreign countries, finding yourself down in some alley a little bit too much piss in you, and these sorts of things. But I always had a really, really good sense for when things are starting to go off the rail, and I get myself out of there many, many times. So for example, I've never had a drunk driving kind of thing, never had an altercation, a physical altercation with anyone, of any super import, drunk. And when I see stuff going really bad, right? I can remember one time I'm in just a quick anecdote. I'm in the north of France, northeast, visiting a girl. And so I've been in a few days there, and we go out with some of her friends. And so they roll up some joints, and that's fine, right? But then they're going from bar to bar to bar, and they're drinking more and more and more. And then at a point, I'm just like, and Gal and I were in the back seat, and at a point, I'm like, we're getting out of here. I opened the door and I yank her out of the car, and of course she's all pissed. I want my friends to party, blah 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 blah. But they ended up wrecking the car, and nobody was hurt, right? But I just had a spidey sense for that. And even though I was stoned and had some drinks too, I call it with my ex-wife all the time. I call it presence of mind. Always, you never ever ever have an excuse to not have presence of mind as a man, right? So that's what I want to say.
No, would you agree with that, Noah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of that comes with maturity as well. And part of that comes with reprogramming yourself. Like I talk to a lot of people about you have a physical hardware that you're working on. That's your neuroticism level. That's really not very changeable. It will change with age automatically as your hormone profile changes and whatnot. But you're not going to go from one extreme to the other in general. Then you have to run software that works on that. So for example, if you are high in neuroticism, you're going to have to run a software, or in other words, program yourself to deal with that neuroticism, or you'll stay in your home and never do anything. And if you're the opposite end, you're too low, you're going to be too easy for you to get into trouble because you're not going to have enough self-protective instincts. And so you need to then pick a software that starts to remind you of these things. So, Richard, he got into a situation there, and there's something in the back of his head going, no, this has gone too far. This is past my boundary that I've set for myself that I'll allow to happen. And I'm going to get out of the situation. And he took the girl with him, which he had no obligation to do. But he was thinking of her as well. So that's his software says, I got to look out for myself and that the woman that I've taken responsibility for the evening. And so it's his programming is what pulled him out, not necessarily his level of neuroticism, because he had it under control. It wasn't like it was forcing him to do something. And I think that's a big difference from the physical limitations we have, and the programming that we then run on top to make that useful, which we'll talk more about later, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good flow into the idea of what we're bringing up with frames of success.
Let me do one quick thing, and I just wanted to say that this whole thing it reminded me of the Nike. I think it's Nike has the campaign, that ad campaign, no limits, and I hate that. I think that is absolutely the wrong word to be able to send to young people, young athletes. No limits. There are always limits, right? Now, and some of them are impossible walls. You will never exceed those limits. I mean, we can go, and plus there's plain old the laws of physics, right? Those are limits. Those are hard limits, so far as we know, right? So it goes down in the hierarchy. There are always limits. So a good thing to do is understand that there are always limits. But what you can also do is say, well, some of them are surpassable. I can surpass these limits. So part of the process,
you can adapt the limits. You can stretch the limit.
You can stretch the limit.
It's usually
I always say limits are temporal. But limits are temporal. They're
yeah. But I think Noah and I talked about this actually in our very first interview somewhere along the line, where you used the analogy is like, if you're 5'5", sorry, you're not going to be an NBA star. That is a hard limit, right? It's just not going to happen. But there's a lot of things you can do. And so one thing is to analyze what all your limitations are and say, well, here's 2 or 3 that I can really work on overcoming or surpassing, rather than this impossible kind of, woo-woo, it's all in your mind, all that bullshit. And so that's my first profanity. So I only get 2 for the whole time. So.
And if we really want to push those limits, there's going to be a cost to that. And we have to decide if the trade-off is worth it. I don't know if you guys know who Ronnie Coleman is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ronnie Coleman, if you don't know who he is and you're watching this, look him up. Powerful, strong man, but he pushed the limits of what the human body was capable of doing. And as strong as he is, he's got hips that don't work now. I think he got robotic hips replaced with but at a relatively young age, his body is shot. He decided to live fast and fall apart young. And that was the choice he made. And he's happy with that choice. He's happy with that trade-off. He said he wouldn't do anything differently. So if you are going to be someone that goes to the very top, I don't mean the top 1%, I mean the top 1% of 1% of 1% in a sport, in business, in anything, there's going to be a trade-off. People will look at, say, Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, and they'll say, oh, I wish I could do that. And no, you don't. You don't want to make the sacrifices they made. You don't want to have to sacrifice working 80 hours a week. In the case of Steve Jobs, no real happy family life, dying young. You don't want to make those sacrifices necessarily to get into that top 1% of 1% of 1%. And if you were willing to make those sacrifices, you wouldn't be talking about it. You'd already be there.
Yeah, I think that topic of sacrifice is probably a good place to start in terms of frames of success. No matter what your IQ or your conscientiousness level or your neuroticism, you can always build frames for success. And one of those for me is sacrifice, as you were saying. It's one of these, Jordan Peterson sells it as the great human discovery. And I think that's fine. But I think looking back at Richard's story, your story of when you get that inkling of, no, it's time to go. I think a few people have that, and I know them, and they're very useful in certain situations. But what I see that is just an offshoot of what, I'm not going to be quoting people here, but just, Socrates called the inner daemon. And I think Adam Smith, what did he call it? The internal witness. Mm-hmm. And this is just basically your feedback. And the internal witness, or what C.S. Lewis called the conscience, which we now call, that's the general term, that it never really tells you yes. It's not like the shoulder of the good and bad. It only ever tells you no. And when I heard that, I thought, God, that's so clever. It's not like you, I understand we have a feeling towards attraction to, a need to a girl or to money or to power or to fame or to whatever these things that people decide to like. But it's a very different thing to that conscience, that thing that says, no, that's not right. And I think a lot of the conscience work for me is being honest, getting that same feedback. But really what a conscience does is it allows scope for sacrifice. It says, you have this choice here, this choice here, that one's wrong. And you sort of go, oh, this is a big thing to give up in order to get that. Is the juice worth the squeeze? And I think it's your conscience. It's your conscience that says this is worth sacrificing.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And that calculation will be a little different for different people. It depends what you personally value. If you're valuing your family life higher than, say, your career, you'll still make some sacrifices for your career because it'll help you to fund your family life, but you're going to have this priority stack. Usually when I talk to clients who are very unhappy with the situation of their life, it's either they lack the agency to accomplish things or they lack a clearly defined priority stack. And sometimes it's both, but the clearly defined priority stack is very important. When I'll tell people, what's more important, your family or your career? And they'll say, oh, both. And I said, then neither of them are important to you. If they're both
if you don't distinguish between values, then neither of them. It's like the was the old Zen koan thing when they say when an object has the classical attributes of God, omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence, what does it lack? And the answer is limitations. It lacks limitation. And I think it's quite an interesting idea that something needs limitation to have form. And I think we can parallel that with sacrifice. You have to limit yourself in order to canalize, meaning like bring action to a thought, a plan. And so I break it down into how I can behave in order to achieve my success, and how I can integrate with objects, what I call objects. So whether they're talking about making money or like building a ship or buying a this, whatever, and then how I integrate with people. And I think if maybe we could talk about the people for a second, which would be the first step in all of this. And the first chapter in every book on self-improvement almost is on active listening or listening. And I think it's worth rehashing again, saying that for me, listening is one thing. It's the constant battle to empty your mind whilst actively applying yourself to what the other person is saying. It's a constant battle because your pictures are coming up and you're thinking, oh, that's a good idea. And to do that, you get so far. Richard?
Yeah.
Sorry, could you repeat yourself? I was just thinking about what I was going to say next and I wasn't listening.
Yes. I do that all the time. I mean, big problem with me. And huge, actually. So I wanted to go back just a bit where you were talking about the limitations in terms of you know, you relate it to sacrifice, but it was very interesting to me what you said, and I was actively listening when you said it. Is this idea of saying of this little thing in the back of your head that says nope, you know. But the other thing is I'm often, well, not so often, but I've had many situations where I'm around people. They're pretty reasonable, but they get some idea in their head, and I'm immediately like, nope, because I see too many ways that can just go wrong. It could be in party situations, it could be with friends, it could be out doing something, and someone, it's like, you know, I don't mind taking calculated risks and doing a little bit of crazy stuff now and then, but sometimes it's just like,
Richard, can I pause you there for good? Can I pause you there for good reason? Okay, so what you've just explained there is what almost everyone does almost all the time, and I'll explain. So it's from my situation, I'm sitting around a dinner table and someone says something that you know, they lay out a plan and they say, oh, this is my business, and my brain's going, uh-oh, I've done that before and it's going to fail because of this. But so is everyone else. And what you've got to step back from that, pull yourself out of yourself in some way and say, let's say you do that 10 times a day for a week. So that's 70 times. You're going to be wrong. You as Noah or you as Rich are going to be wrong 5 times, 10, 15 times. And so is everybody else. So in some sense, that's what conversation is. That's sort of like us constantly judging. When I say what I'm saying now, I have a sort of, I don't know, when I say things, I've almost got the cynic on my shoulder constantly. You know the person, because I always say cynicism is a key to failure. I used to say cynicism is the key to failure, and my friend said, no, it's just A. And it's cynicism as kind of bringing out the worst out of everything, you know, almost like hypercritical. And the funny thing is, I look at cynicism and criticality as the idiot's way out. I'm not saying we shouldn't criticize. I'm saying the person who sits back and criticizes until the cows come home, they're usually the person with the least to bring to the table.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
I agree with that. And my thing is that I see infinite possibilities. I'm always seeing possibilities. And I'm the other way around. I will too easily see the possibilities and not enough the criticism. And I like to have some people around me who can give me that reality check, because otherwise I'll bite off more than I can chew. And so I appreciate actually having someone that's capable of being somewhat cynical. My wife's great about that. You know, it's a very Latin European thing. She's Portuguese, and it's very Southern European. Everything is wrong, and it's wrong all the time. And she's a positive person, but when you propose an idea, you have to propose the idea and cover all your bases.
Yeah.
Because sounds like you're a good match. You found yourself a good match.
Yeah. If there's a weakness, and I need that, if there's a weakness in your plan, she'll instantly see the weakness.
Is it overstretching, Noah, for me to say that in picking your wife, or partly, you've padded or helped one of your own limitations?
Yes, absolutely.
That sounds very heartless, but you know, in a practical manner, that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I even she not only will notice these problems, I picked someone who will notice them, but will bring them up in a non-emasculating way, which I think is important. Now, I'm the kind of guy that sees a falling down castle and I go, wow, that would be so beautiful if we fixed it up. And half the time I'm just like dreaming, and the other half I'm looking at and saying, hey, actually, this could be an interesting project, just as an example. And then she'll, you know, bring it down to reality and go, yeah, but you know what, we'd have to sacrifice to accomplish that. And she helps me remember the sacrifice. I remember I told you earlier, one of my limitations is that very low neuroticism. And I remember as a kid, you know, I see some kid picking on another kid, and that guy's twice my size. And I'm like, hey, I don't like you picking on people. I'm going to go fight him. And if I had someone more sensible there, they might have go, you're going to get your teeth knocked in if you're not careful. And it never occurred to me that the sacrifice was probably not worth the effort. I was okay with that.
Yeah, no, you just did something that I found quite funny. You did something which I call a front-handed insult to yourself, which is, so you know the concept of a backhanded compliment when you say, "Oh, you're really, you're being sarcastic." Well, you just expressed one of your own limitations, having low neuroticism, to an audience of human beings with which probably 90% of them wish they were less neurotic. So it's sort of like it's a front-handed insult because it's actually showing you in a good light, but showing that good light has itself got problems. Anyway,
there's when Noah was when I was actively listening to Noah, I something he was talking about his that's kind of a yin yang. He's kind of the let's do this. I've got the idea, and she's like the no, it'll never work kind of, and then and then it filters down into something that maybe could work, right? Well, a sensible thing. In a similar vein, and this I think could be called a frame for success, is being able to have to be pretty good at in terms of being I hate to, I'm not visionary, but the ability to envision somewhat what the end result is down the path, where once you do, and if you think it's reasonable, then you can begin to break it down. It's okay, it's going to take this and this and this and this and all these tasks and steps to get to that end vision. And so a couple of examples for me was the wife and I bought a place, a fixer-upper thing, back in like 1999, and so I was like, and she had brought me. She was the shopper, so like, go see this home, 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 and then when she came to that one, I'm like, I can see what this looks like, a few years down the road, right? She couldn't get it. She did not. It's not criticism on her. She just doesn't see it, right? So all these things I was like, I'm doing this and this and this and this. She's like, what? Red on the walls in the living room? That makes you, all these kind of things. And I really decked it out over a couple of years and we made huge money when we sold it. But at the end, she's like, now I see it, right? It was the same thing with the place I'm living in now. I've pretty much rebuilt it, and she didn't see it. She just like, it's like, I can't see that. I don't see it. And same thing with some business things we've done. So I think that's just a frame of, she was a school teacher and she, for 35 years, very stable job, better safe than sorry, right? And
Richard, can I make a point on that? I think it's really good. As I was saying, taking a frame for success and saying, let's look at it in order to deal with objects or deal with people. And I said active listening is very much the people one. And I think also what you're saying now is really integral to working with people to attain ends that you both want, or to dovetail two ends. And what I mean by this is, I put in our notes, basically learning people's frames and aims and values, and then almost judging them by their own aims. What I didn't mean there is some moral relativism. I didn't mean that if you've got some psychopath, you're talking to them and they do a psychopathic thing, then that's fine by their standards. I'm saying when you talk to someone and you learn about them and you learn how they react in certain situations, you learn what they value, how they behave, all of these things, you can bring it together to, let me get this right, to almost get a picture of them from their own mind. So when I hear Noah talking about his tribulations or his issues with hormones or this, I'm thinking, okay, this is how he frames this, and the low neuroticism, and he's positive, and he's an ideas man, and I'm bringing these together, and it allows me at some point to say, all right, I'm now able at a gradational level, it's not a 0 and 1 thing, to converse with Noah such that when he tells me a lie, or if he tells me a lie, or he falls by his own standard, I can my brain goes, okay, I think he'll have been disappointed with that. It marries with his face, and we have a conversation, and I'm basically, what I'm saying is I'm attuned to that. So encapsulation, it sounds complicated, but it's not. When you speak to someone, if you have that frame in your mind of how does this person view themselves, what do they value, and what behaviors do you think they would exhibit or I could exhibit that would offend them or bring them into feeling worse about myself or them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting too that in both Richard's case and my case, it's the woman who is more risk adverse and the man who is more visionary, and that's that even has a reflection. That's very common. It's the normal male female dichotomy. Women have amazing vision for the width of their vision is greater than men, so they can see out to a larger angle than men, and they're very good at seeing 2 or 3 things happening at once in their very close field of vision. Men, however, we have hunter's vision, long physical vision. I mean, long. We can see things that are far away in high detail and focus on them. That's what you need to do when you're hunting. You need to be able to see that animal that's a kilometer away and go in and chase him. And that physical difference reflects how we think about things as well. Women can pay attention to several things happening at once intellectually as well, but they don't go as deep and as far as men tend to go.
Yeah, I look at it, I often say it's context and content, which is, another one of these grossly overgeneralized generalizations, but I think when you say content, if guys are very much, we talk engineering and we'll fix a car and it's all about content. It's like, does this work with this? If I put this in this, will this engine start? If I do this, is this tennis player better than this tennis? Is this sportsman better than this? Is my son taller or shorter? Whereas women generally, much more often, will talk about the context. So when they tell a story, if you say, I might say to you, no, today I did this and I did these 4 things. A woman's more likely to contextualize this and link it to this and contextualize this. And it's a totally different process. And I think this is where, as much as we need to, there is training towards males acting in a more masculine manner, helping them along certain pathways and females with that. I think that men could learn a bit more from contextualization, and even more than that, realizing how much women contextualize things, and women with the same with men, how much there's a funny story which I always find. I lived with a Canadian Finnish guy called Matti, and he had a girlfriend from Iran, and she was awesome, really energetic girl. Anyway, she came over to the flat and he had a piece of paper in his hand and he was writing a plan down, and he screwed it up in a ball and threw it in the bin. And he got it in the bin and I just went, whoa. And we both had that moment of absolute impressment at him being so precise at 7 meter throw of a piece of paper. And his girlfriend didn't even notice. And we always come back to that, how that sort of behavior, and the same with women in like nail varnish or something. I just won't notice it. And I can apply myself to learning, but it's not, it takes more energy to do so.
How do you like my like my hair? I'm like, oh, did you get a haircut?
Well, for example, the question, does this dress make me look fat?
Yes.
Does not mean that you should answer it.
Right.
What she's saying is, I feel insecure and I need you to reassure me. Whereas if a man says, do I look fat? What he's saying is, am I sufficiently fit to hunt with you? That's basically what he's saying deep down inside. And if we talk to women the same way we talk to men, or for women, if you talk to men the same way you talk to other women, you're going to have a hard time getting along with the opposite sex. You need to understand, as you mentioned, Andy, you need to be able to see other people's frames and understand what they're saying. A great example, we were sharing this earlier, was one of the Trump accusers. She's talking about what she thinks. And the reality is if you take away the word think each time and you put feel in there, now her conversation actually makes sense. She's confused thinking with feeling. In general, women will talk about what they think. They always mean what they feel. It's what I feel. I feel this, I feel that. And I encourage women to be honest and say, talk about your feelings. Try to avoid the word think.
Yeah.
Talk about what you feel. And for men, focus on it. You don't say I feel. That sounds kind of weak. If you're talking about feelings, yes. But if you're talking about what you think, use the word think. Use the correct word.
I've made this point many times. In fact, recently to someone, and that is, and she uses the word feel a lot. But I eschew always using that word. I know it's appropriate sometimes, but that's more for that you're describing an emotion, like that this meal makes me feel good. That movie, that film made me feel really great. Yeah, that's appropriate. When you're talking about ideas and so on, I think I judge. People are afraid.
Do you know why I think? Do you know why I think that a lot of men? This is obviously again another one of those vast generalizations.
What do you feel, Andy?
Right.
What do you feel? What do you feel about this?
Now, guys, what I'm feeling here, right, is I'm feeling a deep sense of sadness about the. What I think is one of the reasons why we balk at mawkish expressions from other men is that there's a huge tendency to milk it. And it's one of the most unattractive things to me from a man, whether it's a male man, old, young, fat, short, thin, whatever, is someone milking their own sorrow. And I think what we do is very English stiff upper lip is actually, it's not lie to ourselves and say, I broke my arm, my arm's fine. It's actually just saying, I'm going to burden this responsibility and I'm going to express to you. You can see it's broken, but I'm dealing with it. And that's, to a woman, sometimes that's actually lying. To my sister, I discussed it with her. She said, why didn't you just say your arm's in pain, you're struggling? And I said, because I don't want to sit through a 2-hour dinner table and whine about my arm every 15 minutes. So it's a really different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
What I said to my wife once when she asked, I said, because it's none of your business. This is my job to look after my own pain, and part of that is the expectation that, you don't burden other people with your responsibilities.
Right. And plus if you are in serious chronic pain, it shows on your face. So you've said it all right there, and if you don't, a little bit of emoting in terms of, whatever, but to sit there and talk about it, I have, it reminds me of some people in my family, not close, fortunately, more distant, but man, it's like every malady is a badge of honor that has to be discussed, and it's kind of a reverse Munchausen, so I don't know what it is, but anyway.
Well, yeah, and oftentimes most people who have physical pain can do significant things to alleviate that pain, not completely, but there are things they can do to make it better. A lot of it comes from diet, that, Richard.
Yeah.
And they'll complain, and you can say, did you ever think about, your back might not hurt so much if you stood up straight, if you lost some weight and whatnot. No, that's not acceptable, because how dare you take away their reason for complaining? And
wow, that's very pertinent. Yeah.
Yeah. For men, we find that we're okay with old people doing that, and children get a little bump and they cry about it. It's not a big deal. We discourage boys from doing it, as we should, because they can't become men if they complain about everything. But to a large extent, we find that disgusting in men.
Yeah. Well, in a similar vein too, not with just health, but another thing that annoys me is when people tell everybody about their financial problems. Like, I'm broke, this, I can't afford it. I hate the term, I can't afford it. Right. And it just, to me, it's like you keep that sort of stuff to yourself. Right. Or at least if you're going to get some consultation, then go get some consultation with someone, so that everybody doesn't around you doesn't have to listen to what a poor church mouse you are. And I don't know what motivates people to do that. So
well, how do you feel, for example, about a man who complains about his job?
Oh,
that's terrible. I've had a lot of women tell me they went on a date with a guy. He was good looking. They liked him. Great conversationalist. But they're like, I will not go on another date with him because all he did was complain about his job.
Yep. Same thing.
It's the most emasculating thing you can do to complain about your job. You can forthrightly say, oh yeah, I don't happen to like this part of my job. Or you can say, yeah, this is not my final job. I'm working to improve my career. That's reasonable. But whining about what you're doing, it's like you've chosen to do that. Do something else if you don't like it, but don't complain.
Yeah, I think I think it's generally agreed across pretty much men and women alike that you don't like to hear dudes whine and complain about stuff, anything really, right? If you have a problem, then you say, well, there's this problem.
And I hate to say it, gentlemen.
Here's how I'm going to solve it, right?
As much as women tell you they want to hear your problems, yeah, be careful with that. I think you guys know. But basically, about 15 minutes.
Just a second, Andy, just a quick second, just one tiny interjection. That's why I always say the problem, the correct answer to the question, "What's wrong, honey?" is always nothing. What do you mean?
That's good. So yeah, about 15 minutes ago, we broached sacrifice generally, and I said, consider the conscience and how that relates to sacrifice. And I thought and you went back to talking about limitations, Richard. And I thought we could maybe talk about just let's call it a frame for success. This frame is training one's conscience in order to deal with either moral issues, social issues, monetary issues, all life's problems, in a way that benefits people around you as well as yourself. Have you got any strategies that you've looked into now, or Richard?
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of my favorites.
Go
ahead, Richard. Go ahead.
Okay. In fact, when you said that, I was like, I know exactly what he's talking about because I did it back in 91 when I had this philosophical sea change from being kind of religious to let's just say a non-believer in myths, right? Taking them literally. And what I did, I know exactly. I remember sitting in a movie theater once, and I'm like, I'm reacting differently to the film than I would have before on some on emotional levels in some places that weren't there before. And not having emotional reactions, I've retrained my automatic responses because I have shifted my values, right? So there were things that were of value to me before that aren't so much of value to me, and things that weren't much of value that are values. So it's what you're seeking to pursue, to gain, to keep, as in terms of values, shifts your conscience, your automatic sort of how you think, judge, and also your emotions, your automatic responses to things, which is, in a sense, that's what emotions are, is they're automatic responses to values or disvalues. Okay, that's what I want to say.
Yeah, well, one of the common questions I get a lot of these questions from men and women, usually youngish, early 20s, can even be a little later. And they're saying, I tend to be very conservative, K-selected type of person. Excuse me. And I've been leading a conservative life. I'm careful who I have relationships with and whatnot. But I'm living in I'm living in New York City. And it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll everywhere. And I'm thinking, like, am I missing out on something participating in this? So they're asking themselves a moral question. Will they feel better to participate in things which at the moment that they're not? And what I say to them is, one day, if you have children, will you feel proud to tell them about all the things you've done?
Wow.
And if the answer is no, then these things that you're contemplating doing are outside of your ethical bounds of what you consider to be proper behavior.
See, that no is an example of a frame for success. As I say, it's not that is all encompassing or deeply truthful. It's a really useful frame. My one, one that I learned online was from Bill Jocelyn, who Megan says it's the only good thing he's ever come up with, which is a bit harsh, which is raise your grandchildren's parents. And I think that just struck me. Every time I hear it, I still think how profound that is as a frame for success, as a frame for kind of model. It's a model for consideration.
Absolutely. I talk with my 5-year-old son about, he wants to have 10 kids. Well, he said he wanted to have 1 million, but that's impossible. When I explained to him how much 1 million is, he wants to have 10 kids. He wants to start having kids young. And then he wants his kids to have lots of kids. This is his own invention. That's his own ideas. And I talked to him about what he wants out of the future. What kind of what do you think would make a good mother for your children, and these type of things. Why would you wait till the child is 25 and they've gone through several failed relationships, and now you're going to talk to them about relationships? But at that point, it's too late.
No,
you wouldn't wait till your kid was that old to talk about their career. People start talking to their kids, teaching them career skills at 5 years old. You're teaching them how to read. You're teaching them how to, what is money and how does money work at a young age. You should be. Relationships are a really important part of life.
I would say that sometimes I was talking to my friend yesterday now about this and saying, in some sense, this is again another one of those generalizations that some people are going to hate, which is the father will try and bring up their child quickly, and I'm not saying good or bad for now, and the mother will try and infantilize the child. So my aunt is a good example. She was talking about how, to me the other week, how children shouldn't be exposed to violence or this or that or that. And I don't want to go into this sort of usual diatribe against that view, but just to say that maybe it's a little bit imbalanced, and maybe the hyper-masculine desire to bring the child to its biggest dragon constantly is a little bit too excessive the other way. But I think, especially for boys, they need to be dragged through the mud. They need to have that experience. I'm not saying that girls don't. I'm saying I know less for girls. I've got less experience and understanding of what they need when they're young.
Well, girls will go through their own proving ground when they have their children. Pregnancy and childbirth is what turns them from the girl into the woman. For boys, their suffering comes earlier in age, and it takes longer because it's a different kind of suffering. This is why all boys at 7 years old should be taken away to a remote camp where they live just with the men like our ancestors did. And ideally, we would have rites of passage for young men again.
Hunting and fishing trips when I was a kid at that age, a big thing, because it was very, very male oriented. And to the extent women were around, they were doing the cooking and preparation of meals, and even some of the dressing of the kills, animals and fish, so on. But it was a very, very manly sort of thing, and I highly recommend it. And another thing is, boys need to spend time with boys. They need to get in their fights and get their noses bloodied, get ridiculed, and boys take ridicule from another boy far more or a group of boys far more seriously than they do from girls. So it's important. They're going to have both, but it's important to get them out where they have both plenty of contact with other boys and men, and go from there. My advice.
And in this era where we're more atomized, it's important that fathers teach their sons how to deal with ridicule.
Oh yeah.
I will tease my son, and I will have smackdown contests where we'll try to say the most insulting thing we can to each other, and it's all in jest. We don't take it seriously, and do the most irritating thing we can to each other, the kind of stuff that guys will sometimes do. And he's gotten now to the point where he just rolls with it, and he's perfectly fine, and no insult insults him. No criticism bothers him. He'll just say, "Oh, I like it. Oh, do it some more. Do it some more." And it's get to the point now where it's almost impossible to get a grip on him with words, And so that's good. That means he's developed that ability to roll with it.
Well, no, you better watch out when he, you might think sort of 16, 17, but when he gets to more like 13, 14, he'll start outsparring you in arguments and this, and you'll start thinking, hold on a minute, this is a man I'm raising here. And it might be earlier than you think. So a funny thing with
my greatest dream is to raise sons that are better than me.
Oh, which is an amazing thing to have that humbleness to say, because often my father, I'll give you two stories. The first one is he used to push me into the holly bush outside our house, like at the end, and not in a rude way, but just in a fun way. And when I got sort of 14, 15, I pushed him on a holly bush. He looked and he just gave me a look, and then he went, okay, and then went on. And yeah, the other one was, what did you just say before? Sorry, I've forgotten where my train of thought with your children.
We do like, we'll make up names to call each other, like insults and things like this. And, we'll smack talk each other.
Oh, yeah, that was it. Yeah, so my father used to play tennis with his dad. And he said the day that his father beat him, he never played him again. He's never played him again, And so my dad brought me up in a way, we do huge amounts of things in the garden. He worked very hard. And when he wasn't working, almost everything we did was in the garden. We would, learn stuff, throw stuff, catch, play games, look at insects, do all of these things. And one of the things was play tennis. And I played a lot of tennis, and whatever age I was when I played him and I beat him for the first time, he was excited. I think he took me I don't think alcohol at the time, but he took me for a milkshake, and he just said, really well done. And he said, the one thing he would never do is let me win. And he said, you deserve that. And that stuck with me for 25 years, or however long it is.
It's amazing how something can so stick with you, because Noah was talking about teaching kids or helping them to how to separate valid criticism from real and everything. And I have a little anecdote that sticks in my mind. It might surprise you to know that I was a massive troublemaker in grade school. I'm sure that comes as a shock to everybody. But so this was 6th grade. So what are you, 11, 12 years old at the time? And I don't know, I created some sort of ruckus or something. I can't remember actually what it was that I had done. But Mrs. Derringer, I still remember her name, Mrs. Derringer, puts me to the back of the class and the desk and da-da-da-da-da. And then she does the typical chick thing. She rallies the class to like ridicule and laugh at me and stuff like that. And she looks over at me. I can still see it right in my eyes. She says, they're laughing at you, not with you. And you know what I did? I went, just shrugged my shoulders.
Yeah. But of course, to her, probably the deepest sense of embarrassment, the worst shame is to be embarrassed and to have people laugh at you. Whereas I think in some sense, like I've done the same as you did with your son, was at some stage I just said to myself, this embarrassment thing, I can create a scenario in which I'll feel a bit uncomfortable. Like if I'm, you're bringing someone a present and on the way it breaks and you say, oh, I'm sorry this has happened. But embarrassment is sort of almost like a signal. It's like a social signal. And I think it's trainable. I think it's one of those things you can train, and much, much harder for a girl, maybe. I don't know.
Another thing.
Well, part of it, people who have a very well-defined circle of influence in their mind don't get embarrassed easy. The only people who I really, truly, deeply care what they think about me is my wife and my children.
Yeah. Exactly.
Of course, I care most what I think about myself. Okay, it's the center. Wife and children next. My friends, including you guys, next. And then beyond that, I literally don't care what people think. So,
and what I was going to say, and it ties in here well with what Noah is saying, is that first of all, you have to separate out. I mean, you have to separate, I would say, valid criticism, right? Not necessarily constructive. Who cares whether it's constructive? What's important is whether it's valid and you can recognize their stuff. Kind of no matter how it's put. It could be put in a ridiculing way. It could be put in a concerned way, helpful way, whatever. But the important thing is that you self-examine and say, is there truth? Is that true? Is it valid? Is there some truth to it? Or whatnot. But some senses, when and I find this with criticism from women a lot, is that it's very solipsist oriented. They get an idea about how you are, and so all of their criticism comes off of their own conjured thing, and it can be way off. And when you're self-critical enough to know, and you're discerning about yourself enough to know that when a criticism comes, whether it's meant helpful, or whether it's in a ridiculing way, an insulting way, whatever, I find it empowering. And I don't know why I find it empowering when someone gets it wrong, and I recognize it's wrong, so I don't care about it. So I consider the source, or consider the circumstances. And that also goes to on the internet in my, many activities over the years. I've been called everything. I've been ridiculed in every single way imaginable. And I'm like, it's wrong. This is hilarious. So I find joy and power and empowerment in it. Does that make sense?
I think there's a lesson here, which is sort of, it might be slightly off what you were saying, but is when all of these little things, like when you prove someone wrong on the internet, or you show them, or they learn from you, is instead of getting this sense of self-satisfaction, is to, basically manage your reactions. Because as you were saying earlier, emotions, I see emotions as reactions to changes in state. I'm not belittling emotions. I'm not saying they're very, very important. But that's kind of what they are. So managing your emotions is such a funny thing. And I think it's a layered thing. So I think the most sophisticated way of looking at people is as a collection of micro personalities. So sort of you've got, hungry Richard, and you've got angry Noah, and you've got determined John Doe, or whatever. And it's almost like when you have one thing on your mind and you're determined to do it, you as Richard, for example, are the same person. And when you are hungry and really, really hungry, and you're not listening to this, you're kind of the same person again, but that's a sort of parallel. And so I think if we can break these down, for example, mine's angry Andy is not a fun person, and I don't get angry very often, but last night, coincidentally, someone had a go, and I was on the verge. I was like, oof, and I could feel myself, and I just thought, okay, I said to myself as it was rising, you're going to be thinking irrationally for the next few minutes. So anything like a comeback or a smart comment, or like just don't do it. And even though you'll think it's stupid that you're not going to do it, even though you feel weak and all of these things, just think about it tomorrow morning. So anyway, I took the flack from the drunk, from the stress, tried to be the bigger man, felt like a bit of an idiot, went to bed, woke up this morning, and I thought, thank God, in this particular circumstance, I didn't poke the bear, because it wouldn't have helped either of us. Do you see what I mean? That's one of many examples.
But
part of it is too, something Richard brought up that's important, talking about men and women in criticism, is the sexual dimorphism in criticism. It's very, very hard for women to teach men. Almost impossible. Men can teach women, and men can teach other men, but it's very, very hard for women to teach men, because they tend to do it. They tend to get way too emotional about their attempts to teach men, and it turns into they invest too much emotionally in the teaching, and so it becomes more of a contest of trying to make the other person feel the thing they're feeling, rather than it is a teaching. And what'll happen is that when men need to give another man criticism, we can depersonalize it sufficiently that even if we're angry at him and someone's been doing something to us, and we need, like what happened yesterday, you depersonalized that. You said, no, it's not the time. I'm sure at some point you'll probably, if that's someone that you care about, you'll talk to them and say, that was not appropriate. This is not, I cannot be your friend if you continue to act like that. I'm sure at some point you'll sort that out. But with women, it will tend to turn into a very emotional, and they'll end up hating very easily when they criticize, because they can't depersonalize it. Whereas men don't tend to do that. And so that makes men much more able to correct the behavior of other people. And you will see this in historically, virtually every organization throughout human history. Women didn't have teaching or correction positions. Those are always the men were in charge of teaching and correction. Women would teach other women, which is a different dynamic.
I
But
have,
they would teach men.
I have, I
He's
have,
not good at it.
I have one perspective, and I don't know whether it's any meaningful or anything like that. But I often tell people that I don't know. I think this is somewhat more typical for men than for women, but I'm not a grudge holder. So I don't like seek revenge. I'm not vindictive. I don't want to destroy someone. And actually, my family is generally like that. Even my mother. Um, and but I think that on the other side, that's what motivates me sometimes to pop right off. Like, just do the stream of emotional thing, even if it's not very rational. Get it over with. Say what you say da 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 da, and then it's over. Right? It's like, next morning, I don't care. I held no animosity towards, there are some exceptions, right? But I'm not a person who's ever really been, I've never had someone really set out to do me harm, financially, emotionally, relationship wise. I just don't. People steer clear of me in that regard, I guess. So I've never had anything where I've had to deal with a super hyper serious, betrayal or something like that. That makes sense. And
yeah, even your stalkers don't raise to that level of.
Yeah. Did you see that? Oh,
wonderful. Yeah, they don't even quite. That's not a dangerous stalker.
Yeah.
More irritating than anything. But yeah, it's I in school, the kid that I was best friends with from grade 2 onward was a British kid. First day he shows up in class, him and I got into a fist fight, and really got into a fight. Like, we were both bleeding afterwards. And we're sitting in front of the principal's office waiting to go in. And we went from wanting to kill each other to being great friends, to the point where the principal comes and says, okay, so what happened here? And then we were like, yeah, don't worry about it. We're friends now.
Yeah.
You guys should shake and we're already friends. We already passed that, because that was how we dealt with it. What it was two very strong personality kids who, didn't want to take crap from anybody. So we clashed with each other, but actually ended up respecting each other because of that clash. And
I have a funny example almost to counter that. Not to counter it, but to give the same lesson from the other perspective, which is, there was a guy, funny enough, called Ollie. I won't say his surname, but from my prep school, so between 10 and 13. So I was probably about 11. And he was a big guy, and I was a martial artsy guy, and I was sort of a back in rugby. So I was sort of a winger or a centre or a fullback, and he was a forward. And we just kind of clashed on a lot of things. And then one day we decided to have a fight. And it was big. It was like a man. It wasn't like, I hate you, let's have a fight. It was like, let's just do this. Let's do it. So we went to the cricket area, and there was a partition. There was an area on the floor that was a rectangular, that was the size of, let's say, compared to a boxing ring, it was probably a little bit smaller than a boxing ring. And we had 45, 50 boys standing around us. Anyway, the actual fight itself wasn't the most interesting in the world. I think we hurt each other. And anyway, I ended up pinning him down or something. And I said to him, words like, don't do that again, or something like that. But what he did was fascinating. He went off, and he was bawling himself, he was in tears, and he was so embarrassed. He went to the headmaster, and the headmaster called me up, and I got a pink slip. The first, slip went off saying, you are a bully, this. My parents got called in. And anyway, that the lesson here is none of that. The lesson is what happened to Ollie. People just didn't, it wasn't as if they talked about him in a bad way. It was that he just wasn't viewed with as much respect. And we're talking about
he lost his honor. He betrayed his honor.
11-year-old children,
No, but boys, especially boys, have a very strong sense of honor. With my son, if we're going to divide something, we get like a really big cookie or something, we're going to divide it. And he's looking at that and going, I think your piece is a little bigger than mine. I'm like, well, I'm way bigger than you. And you'll think about it. Okay, that makes sense. it's not, it's a matter of this is fair, this is honorable, this is the just and right way to do things. And boys are very much about like that. In fact, I've seen studies that suggest that young boys have a stronger sense of honor than your average adult male. I think it gets beaten out of us in the very gynocentric school system. And even as we get older, it gets taken out of us, that sense of honor and right. And I mean, that's, you know, when I was describing getting into a lot of fights in school, it was almost always because I would see a big kid beating up a little kid, and that would offend my sense of honor, and I couldn't walk away.
No, the reason why I took up martial arts is to bully the bully. And I don't mean bully in that sense. Exactly the same view. There was a guy called Joe Marone, who used to, when I was first day at school, he had a towel, and I think it was wet, and he twisted it, and he, you know, did that stuff. And yeah, we had altercations, but it's a very strange thing. Bullying is a funny concept, because when they say all cowards are bullies, it's sort of, I used to hate that phrase, but when I look at it, it's kind of interesting. It's almost as if they, like when you when you attack a bully, they are more frightened and childish and Christen than everyone else. And you think that shouldn't make sense, but it's a consistent thing I found when I was a teenager.
Hey, guys, so in terms of time here, I think we need to start figuring out how to wrap up. We're at about an hour and a half or so.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good.
An hour 40, so we should wrap it up.
Yeah, perfect. So what about talking, maybe we could close with, Noah and I were discussing, it's all very well talking ideologically or abstractly about all of these ideas, but then today we brought them into concrete form, hopefully a little bit, and said these strategies here, this doesn't work here, limitations. But then a stage beyond that is actually bringing people together, usually in the same place, for a few days or a day or a week or whatever it is. And Noah and I were thinking of running something, maybe, I don't know, it would be late this year or next year. Let's just say next year, just to keep it sort of for now.
Andy, one second here. Why don't we quit? I noticed, I don't think we covered, we can cover them quickly, avoid pitfalls such as seeing everything through one frame, ideology, falling into nihilism, and then stepping back from current affairs, news, and ideological battlegrounds. Can we do like a 5 minutes on those and then cover?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the pitfalls thing, avoiding pitfalls, is really easy. It's that ties into not seeing everything through one frame. So if you're saying, Noah, if you're teaching your son, I think it's very useful to talk about teaching children here, because it simplifies it to a certain extent, because they've got less on their mind, you know, not mortgages and marriages.
Adults are just big children anyway.
Right, exactly. So I think, you know, teaching your child, for example, about, you know, justice or honor or fairness or reciprocation or saving, all of these things, it's very easy for a child, especially, to have a conversation that he really engages with his father with, for example, and say, wow, my father taught me about, you know, justice today. And then suddenly his whole world becomes about justice. And it's really important to, when I say avoid pitfalls, and what I was talking about in our last conversation about occupational hazards, whenever I go into a project or build a frame, I think, what are the limitations of this frame? Am I going to, you know, the male-female thing, let's look at, you know, what can men thrive and women thrive? And then we go, oh, hold on a minute, there are some limitations to this frame. So sometimes I'm going to consider the world not like in that manner. And I think, so when I was talking about pitfalls, it's very much always trying to find another way of looking at what you're looking at, and always be a little bit cautious when you think you understand something better than someone else.
Yeah, well, if you...
Well, and sorry, just a second. For young people especially, or I would say for the more immature, the frames need to be very simple, almost black and white. Those frames, the frame that serves you when you're 5 years old won't serve you when you're 10, 15, and 20. You're going to need to constantly be updating that frame. And for children, it's a very black and white, you know, like my son will say he had a heart. He thought that bad people came from bad people, as if this was like inheriting your hair color or something. And it starts out like that. And you have to widen that scope. You have to help them understand the nuance of things over time, but you have to start off with some sort of frame. If you start off with almost relativism in the beginning, they will feel incredible anxiety. because it's too complicated to understand. You know, there's good and bad. When you're a small child, there's only good and bad. There's nothing in the middle. And you will slowly help them to understand the nuances of that. And that's just part of the process. What concerns me is I will often see, and I see this a lot on people who are politically involved. They'll be in their 20s and 30s, and they're still as black and white, no ability to see nuance as you should be when you're 5. They're not much progressed from a young child in their ability to see things, and that's concerning. That's scary because the extremism isn't the problem. The problem is that people they literally cannot see the world accurately because they're seeing it in just 2 colors and not the full spectrum.
I look at it something like I say something like we protect our opinions too much. So it's sort of like, you know, if someone's shouting and you say, stop being angry. And they say the worst thing to say to someone when they're angry is don't be angry. And one of the reasons is possibly because they see it as their anger. And I'm not trying to defend this in a good way. I'm not trying to slate anger because it's important, but I'm saying that the same thing happens with opinions. If you're an absolute cricket fan and I say, oh, cricket's a bit of a stupid sport, isn't it? Or whatever, you're going to immediately be like, and get defensive because it's your game. And I think that's something with which the male-female paradigm might not have much of a help with, because I think both men and women in their own ways really, really suffer from that. And so when I'm saying avoid pitfalls, part of this is saying, okay, basically don't be so protective of your opinions. Separate your values, so honesty, you know, loyalty, all of the things that you grow with your conscience, you figure yourself out over time. Separate that from your opinions on, you know, this sport is better than this, cats be dogs, you know, go to bed early, go diet 1 be diet 2. So Richard, I'd like to mention this for the end, which is I watched your talk on your paleo talk, your 16
sociology and epistemology, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting the way you were giving a talk on sociology, epistemology, and light touchings on diet, because it was a paleo conference.
Right.
And I really liked the way you built up your flow through that. It was very good. And then when I got to the end of it, I thought, shall I watch that again? And then I looked down and there was Keith Morris's talk, one of another person that we've been in contact with. And I clicked on it and I watched it. And he said one thing, which is, I can't let the perfect get in the way of the good.
Right.
Yes. And this, for me, is a huge pitfall of people who, Moritz was talking about in the last talk, of people who can have all these ideas, they splurge them out, but they never actualize any of them. Yeah, I think a lot of that is, when you said you've had 3 businesses and the first 2 failed and the third one succeeded, well, you wouldn't have even started your second one if you hadn't integrated that. Yeah,
well, that's, you know, it's funny. The funny thing about that is that I had a good chunk of money saved up from my years, you know, as a Navy officer, and being at sea so much, I didn't have much to spend it on. And so I had a good chunk and pretty much used almost all of it in the first 2 failures. So I call that my bachelor's degree is in business administration. So I call that money I spent my master's degree tuition, you know. But to get back to what, you know, we had talked about this before at some level. I talked about it with Moritz, and I've talked to you about it, Andy, and this, you know, seeing everything through one frame ideology, you know, that's kind of what I say, seeing it through one paradigm and being more omnicentric, being able to actually, you know, understand the assumptions people use, the paradigm that they build around it, and to be able to go and understand, as Yasuhiko says, understand, so that you can actually see, right? Because, you know, it's their ideology and not yours because it's theirs. You have your own base, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't have things to learn rather than being bang at the thing. The other point I was going to make to Noah, what Noah said about, you know, the young people being very black and white, right? And we see this at least. I'm not sure how it is in your neck of the woods, Andy, but certainly everybody's seen the stories about the universities in America where they have like the safe space room, and they provide coloring books and cookies and puppies to pet. You know, I mean, it's just So it's exactly like a kid, you know, crying over spilt milk, crying because he doesn't get the cookies, crying because mom and dad won't let him have a puppy, you know, on and on and on, these sorts of things. And it's because they only see the world through their very narrow vision, and it hasn't begun to expand yet. So
I think this is where we go on to, again, we go back to agency, and maybe agency, you know, I've heard agency described by Moritz and beside other people. In some sense, I quite like the idea of it as training appropriate behavior. Obviously, it's very specific. You can look at agency as how much you affect, you know, yourself and other people, how well you achieve your ends. But I think training appropriate behavior can be, I want to make £1 million through this project, and then you train a behavior to get that. Or it can be, I'm not going to mention my libertarian leanings in this crowd of very left or right leaning people. It can, do you know what I mean? Training appropriate behavior, I think, is one of the best descriptors of agency. And a lot of what we're talking about, the frames for success, are frames for agency expansion. Would anything not know? Anything
and part of the problem is, you know, intelligence is not a protection against holding on to maladaptive behavior, maladaptive paradigms, disproven paradigms. In science, there's a saying that disproven theories only really die when the scientists that have a stake in those theories die. Mm-hmm. You know, so something can be disproven. It can take 50, 60 years for it to really work its way out of the scientific community, because these are smart people, but they get a stake, an emotional, personal stake in a certain idea, and it's impossible for them, for many of them, not for all of them, for many of them, to admit that they were wrong and pick up this new paradigm that will help them to be relevant in the long run. This is why you will see most scientific advancement is made by very young scientists, and older scientists who should have all the experience and be the ones actually making the progress. They're often stuck in outdated paradigms. And with agency, the key is do you have the tools, the skills to look at what your paradigm is? You know, I get people to do this. I wrote a course for people to do this, to write down exactly what is your current programming. You know, how is it that you deal with your problems? You deal with them in these ways. What is it that you believe or think about certain things? And then to piece that apart and see what is maladaptive. What is not adaptive to your current reality? Take that out and replace it with something that does do what you need it to do. And that should be a process that you continue.
Yeah, I was just thinking, that's what you just said there is an expression of why I ordered the things the way I ordered them today. So truth versus honesty. You need to look at what you see as truth. You use your eyes, use your senses, and then bring back the honesty to that. And then look at your limitations. And then only having done that can you build frames. Obviously, it's a process. It's a cyclical process, but yeah, I think agency is a very hot topic at the moment. I don't want it to get into, I don't want it to be offshot into too obsessed with IQ or too obsessed with certain areas, when all it really is matching your behavior to the situation.
So a high IQ person with low agency is like a Ferrari with bald tires. You got lots of power, but you cannot put that power to the pavement in a way that's going to get you where you want to go. You're out of control, and you're better off to be a Toyota with bald tires, because it's not designed, it's not capable of destroying itself with those bald tires in the same way that a high performance car can. A man without agency is out of control. His life is out of control. He can't control himself.
Yeah. Hey. Okay. So I think we could actually frame this in terms of agency in somewhat. The last two items: step back from current affairs, see them as both news and ideological battlegrounds, and trusting people in a more sophisticated manner. And then we can, go to the wrap after that. But let me just start by saying that one of the things in that presentation that I covered is like the news and how people see it as some authority, right? it's all this network of authority and spinning the narrative, and that's the official word. So we have to. I'm seeing from Noah that we have to wrap this up real quick. So let me just say that. Yeah, it's authority, which means you lack agency. When you're too honed in on what the news is and everything, this is a lack of agency on your part. And to develop agency, you look at them as data points, connect some dots, say, okay, I kind of think this is is it important or is it not important? Is it really just about your ideology, or is it factually important in the sense of economics and so on and so forth? And so trusting people in a more sophisticated manner, I would just say that the more agency you have, the more you have trust. You have hierarchies of trust. You trust some people for some things, not for others. You know, there's the trust horizontal, and then there's all of these vertical hierarchies for person A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? So that's a sophisticated way. So that's what I'll say, and then Andy and Noah, you can take it from here.
Okay, I'll leave with just one frame for success, you could say, which is, let's call it considering current affairs as ideological battlegrounds, is what I said. So whenever you get a story like Donald Trump this, or Theresa May, or climate change this, you see climate change comes and then half the people, or 60% of the people go mad for it, and then the other people go, oh, it's all lies. Instead of looking at that, just think that every story, miniature or macro or micro, is just, it's information, and you can take it as you will, but also just sort of detach yourself from the ideological battleground. As much as we might be red pillars or purple pill, or however you put it, realize that itself is a limitation, and we're going to miss out on a lot of information because we are more tied to that and less tied to something else. And so the reason why I'm saying this is a frame for success is it's really freeing when you realize you don't have to defend your left or right wing or libertarian or whatever views. You don't have to defend why you like this. And when a story comes up, you can just go, okay, Donald Trump that. Okay. Anyway, it's a frame for success because it's freed my mind up to do a lot more productive things. What do you think now?
Well, I think that oftentimes a preoccupation on current news is a way for people to be sufficiently mentally busy to not think about their own current frames and what they're doing in their life and their own habits. It's distraction. The very first thing in that course I have for developing agency, the very first thing I tell you to do is, you are too busy. You're wasting too much time. Let's make a list of all the things you could stop doing that won't kill you.
Guilty.
Ever tried to do that? Make a list of all the things you could stop doing that you do in life that you won't die if you stop doing them.
Yeah.
And it's probably like 90% of the things you do.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, I just wanted to say, as I mentioned earlier, that we were going to consider a conference, bringing some people together. I just wanted to say a couple of things on that, which was my initial views were I didn't want it to be too, in the vein of what we're saying today, I didn't want it to be too narrow. So bring together people who are of a certain ilk, but also, do you know what I mean? We need to basically find a balance of types of people, ages. If we're going in Portugal, we need to think of obviously the time of year, basically plan it. I think I've got 30 to 50 people. I've got probably 80 people I can invite. I've got 30 to 50 people who would almost definitely be there in a heartbeat. And I'm really looking forward to working with you on, and maybe if we can get Megan in.
I'm already getting quotes for rent a castle in the countryside and have a catered everything and have something very nice.
That would be great. I'm in. Okay, we'll develop that more. Thanks as always, Andy and Noah, and hopefully we have more conversations to come, and hopefully people aren't what are they talking about? Hopefully, we'll get better and better at it too. The video will be up soon both on YouTube and freetheanimal.com. And I'll include our outline. I will also include a link to Noah's website, smv4, the number 4k.com. And Andy, do you have any website, or are you still working on it?
No, I'm undercover.
You're undercover. Okay. All right, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thanks very much.